Hey Max, how are you this evening?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I am doing well. It's good to have you back from Mexico.
Yeah, it's good to be back.
Yeah, and we are doing the sixth Lent podcast or Zoomcast, I think is what we're actually calling it.
Yep. We've been going for a while. It feels like it's gone really fast though.
It really does. It really does. And I've actually really loved how we've kind of walked through a progression through Lent of um, not just doing something, but actually letting God spiritually work on us through this practice in an intentional way.
Absolutely.
Not that he wouldn't anyway, but I love the intentionality that we've been able to bring to it. And I think this week kind of moves us to maybe the real question beneath all the other things that we're doing. And that's just how do I, as a follower of Christ, receive Jesus?
Yeah, absolutely. Everything we've been doing, everything we've been talking about, where we've been, looking for what God is doing in our lives and all of that kind of stuff really brings us to this point of now, okay, I have this relationship with Jesus, but he's continuing to work on me and he's continuing to transform me into his image. And so, how do I respond to transformation?
Yeah. Yeah. And this week is leading us up to Palm Sunday. And that's going to kind of be the focus of this week because on Palm Sunday, of course, is when Jesus makes his triumphal entry into Jerusalem, and we have the crowds cheering and they're shouting, Hosanna. They're celebrating him as king. They believe the deliverer has arrived. Yet I think the majority of the people in that crowd misunderstand just what kind of king has come to them. They're expecting this military political victory kind of king, and that's just not the kind of king Jesus is at that time.
Yeah, and I think you really hit it on the head with the word that you used, which is expectation. And so, what expectations do I bring to Jesus?
Mm,
We have expectations for everything.
yeah,
Expectations aren't bad, but they need to be examined like anything else.
yeah,
And so, when it comes to Jesus, what are my expectations for him? And then also, what happens whenever maybe my expectations are wrong, and how do
yeah,
I address that, and how do I deal with that, and how do I move forward from that, like these people who they're so excited whenever he enters, so excited for this moment, they're shouting hosanna, they're laying down palm branches and coats, and they're so happy that he's there, and then he doesn't meet their expectations, and they completely change their tune on him, and it turns to crucify him real
yeah,
fast.
yeah.
um, and so we also have expectations when it comes to Jesus, what he's going to do in our lives, how he's going to answer our prayers, what transformation is going to look like. So we need to be aware of those expectations as well as willing to address and change them as necessary.
Yeah, one of the things that I think about quite a bit along these lines is in Luke 6, when Jesus is telling the story and he meets this person and he asks him, "Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and don't do the things I say?" And I think that we can be guilty of that. We're quick to claim Jesus as Lord of our lives, but that has the implication that we're actually following him. And where the rub comes in that you were just talking about is when he isn't maybe the Lord or the King that we expected, then how do we respond to that? And that's kind of what we want to address this week, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The question of, is Jesus truly the Lord of my life comes down to what in our culture is a dirty word, which is submission,
Yeah.
which is, are you truly submitted to Jesus? And if he's the Lord of your life, if he's the king of your life, then he has full control, full authority, and you submit everything to him, his teaching, and his will. And that's no small ask.
No.
So anyone listening to this, don't think that we're sitting here going, and this is easy and you
Oh
should
yeah.
just get it. No, no, it's a challenge to submit every part of yourself to him. And it requires us to be in continuous reflection and awareness of where are those rubs in my life? Where are those teachings of Jesus that because he's Jesus, I know I'm supposed to agree, but this is really hard in practice, and this is a real challenge for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talked about the ongoing nature of it. It's not something that we finally arrive at that point, and now every part of our life is completely aligned under Jesus's kingship. This is something that we have to revisit time and time again, and it is hard. And I think it may be particularly hard for us as Americans because we don't really have that concept of kingship like maybe other cultures did, or like they did 1,000 years ago, where there truly was a king that had absolute authority over our lives. Yet that is who Jesus is. And so this week, we want everybody to just be reflecting on what kind of king you see Jesus as. Is he a king of your own making? Or are you receiving him as the king that he really is? And when we're reflecting on this and contemplating on his kingship, I think that affects our heart in several ways. One, it will expose those expectations. We love a Jesus that supports our plans. We love a Jesus that fixes our problems. We also love a Jesus that leaves our own desires and priorities untouched. And so this invites us to have that honest reflection time and truly call us to surrender, right?
Yeah, I mean, we already kind of hit on this, and it's you know pretty straightforward, but much easier to explain than it is to practice, which
Yeah,
is that call to surrender every part of yourself to Jesus. Receiving Jesus as king means acknowledging his complete authority over everything. We let his teaching define what is true.
yeah,
And again, a lot of these are easier said than done. His commands guide our lives and they dictate our actions, and we live in submission to that. His mission becomes our mission. What he calls us to is what we call ourselves to.
yeah,
And this surrender is not loss, but it is alignment with the life that we were actually created for. God knows us better than we know ourselves, and he
hmm,
created us for a good and fulfilling purpose. And the world is broken, and so things have gotten messed up. And in that, we now have these expectations and we now have our own desires that go honestly against his desires, against his will. And we get comfortable with those.
yeah,
And whenever those have to change, it's really uncomfortable, but it's not uncomfortable in a bad way because you're actually going more in line with the way you were created to be. And that is what we are doing whenever we examine these expectations and surrender to Jesus. And then ultimately, it deepens our trust in God's kingdom. Jesus came for a real kingdom, not just for a hypothetical kingdom, but as king, he rules and reigns. And he doesn't do this through, power or control or domination, but he advances it like how he enters in humility and how he lived in sacrifice and love and faithfulness. And following this king, Jesus requires that we trust in God the way that Jesus trusts in God
yeah.
to lead our lives, to guide our lives, and to ultimately be the ultimate authority for every aspect of our lives.
Yeah, I think about what the Lord's Prayer, thy kingdom come to earth as it is on heaven. And so this isn't a kingdom that we're waiting on. We are called to be a part of bringing this kingdom to earth. And I think the idea of surrendering, leading to freedom, is kind of a hard jump to make. But when we truly do surrender our life to God's ways, to Jesus's teaching, to following Him, there is such a freedom in not only having to make all those decisions that we're really not very good at making about our lives, but also a freedom in discovering that no, this really is best.
Yeah.
And like you said, as we continually do that, as we continually surrender and see that this way really is best. It wasn't easy. It wasn't convenient. In some cases, it's not even fun to get to that point. But once we're there, it does just deepen that trust and allow us to go to that next level and that next step. And that's what being a disciple is about: taking one step and then the next and then the next and following Jesus. So we've got some practical applications for this week to actually put this in place. And so the first one is just honest reflection. Where am I expecting Jesus to serve my agenda rather than submitting to His? And I think that part of that is asking God to reveal that to us. Part of it is just us being honest with ourselves, and because we probably know where some of those rub points are that we need to surrender. Are we admiring Jesus as a good man, a good teacher, a person that saved us, or are we truly seeing him as our Lord? And so, just in that reflection, what areas of my life do I need to surrender to his authority?
Yeah, and one of the best kind of ways to somewhat examine this is look at the text
Mm,
that we're talking about. And you've got a lot of options with this one because
yeah,
it's recorded in all four gospels. And I think we'll include that in the
yeah,
reference material for this. So I'm not going to read each reference directly, but read one of those recordings of Jesus's triumphal entry and read them slowly.
yeah,
Maybe read a couple of them and notice the details and notice how the different authors point out specific things about Jesus's character in this moment, the responses of the crowds, and we know what's going to happen in a week, and we know how they're going to turn, and we know what's going on. So notice what's happening with the different people, the disciples, Jesus, the crowds, and spend time reflecting on who Jesus is truly revealing himself to be in this. The humility of riding in on a donkey,
yeah,
the recognition of the fact that he is the most powerful, the all powerful God among them, and he chooses to humble himself,
mhm,
and he knows the cross is coming, and he still enters, and
yeah.
he enters victoriously.
Pretty amazing to think that. I think back to what Paul read this weekend and just that description of Christ, yet his willingness to surrender and submit to the Father's authority and to sacrifice himself is pretty amazing. So, whether through personal reflection, God showing you in prayer, the places where you need to surrender, the reading through the triumphal entry passages, what we this week is identifying that one place in your life where Jesus's teachings are challenging your personal preferences and then consciously choosing to obey Jesus rather than your own preferences.
I think
And
it's important that we note that I think there's different levels of rub in
mm,
that you might experience. So you might start looking at things and go, "There's nothing that I disagree with. There's nothing that I really want to push back on." Um, and if that's the case, then it's like, okay, but where is it hard for you to actually practice?
yeah,
So it might not be flat out disagreement.
yeah,
It might just be, yeah, I agree with this wholeheartedly in theory, but in my own life, that's a challenge to love my enemies.
yeah,
That's a challenge to pray for those who persecute me. Um, and looking at that and saying, like, okay, you don't have to disagree for it to be an area where you can call yourself to deeper surrender.
yeah. I think one area that we all have ran up against is I love the idea of forgiving others. Man, it's sometimes hard to forgive someone else. And so that's the exact kind of thing that you're talking about. The I agree with the teaching and I support it, but now I need to live this out. And we want you to be intentional this week on actually living that out, whatever that may look like. Thinking about how the crowds welcomed Jesus, how they celebrated him, but truly following Jesus isn't just about excitement. It's about receiving him as that king that he truly is, truly following him step by step, following his commands, following his example that he has set for us. And so this week in Lent invites us to examine just where our allegiances lie. And so I want to just encourage everybody this week to spend that time honestly uh, examining how you respond to Jesus's kingship.
Absolutely. And I don't know if there's anything, maybe we've said, I think we say this almost every week, but I don't know if there's anything more transformative than this to say,
Yeah,
Jesus, I truly want you to be the Lord of my life, but I'm not perfect at that. And I need to grow in this. And no matter how far along you are in your journey with Jesus, like we said, discipleship is one step at a time.
yeah,
No matter how long you've been walking with him, I guarantee there is an area that you could take another step. And we are all called to that. And the only way you're ever going to do it is to have that time of honest examination of your own heart and thoughts and say, God, reveal to me where I can be more obedient to you. And this isn't about obedience for the sake of earning something or earning our salvation in any kind of way, but it's about the fact that when we are obedient to God, it honors and glorifies Him, and He deserves it. He is worthy, and
yeah.
He is fully deserving of our complete obedience.
And I just have to imagine a prayer like that, God, show me where I can be more like Jesus. That has to be a prayer that God likes.
Yeah,
That has to be one that is his joy to answer. And know that not only will he answer that, but he will actually provide the strength and encouragement and what you need to actually make that change. And so even the change itself is part of our spiritual development in following Jesus. So I'm looking forward to this week and seeing what God reveals in my life and how I can look a little bit more like Jesus this week.
it's always the goal.
Always the goal. All right. Have a great evening, buddy.
You too.
All right. Bye.